Mike, I'm going to invite you to push us a little harder on our equity thinking. As you know, one of the prominent criticisms of collective impact work is that it can, in some instances, reinforce existing power dynamics in communities and exclude the very vulnerable populations that it's designed to serve from taking a meaningful part in the decision-making process. So I wanted to ask you your thoughts about who should be at the table, really, and how do you balance off needs for efficiency as against needs for representation and participation?
I don't try to balance efficiency because I know that whether you do it in the first day or the 10th year, the community will move when it's ready. So the question is, when will you learn that? So for me, I start by making sure that I'm clear about how I'm showing up, my consciousness. Do I actually want to work with community? See, in many cases, that's not our intention. So this is why we can't find folks. This is why it takes so long. All those work avoidance things that you hear, which are really excuses that in most environments you'd be fired for, right? You're not getting beyond. They are really because we're scared of each other. You know, I don't know how you work with community if you're afraid of them. Like people can't sense that on you, right? And so a lot of the stuff that breaks down around equity breaks down because of our orientation to how we see folks. We see them as less than, we don't see them as capable. And while people don't have to say stuff, people of color walk through the world highly intuitive. That's how you learn to survive. So you can experience that, you know. And so, you know, you wonder why people aren't coming to your meetings. They know that you really don't value their insight. They know that you're going to move your agenda anyway. And you know, the evolution of collective impact was really powerful, and I applaud FSG because a few years in, they were getting this critique, and they came to us, and, you know, the former president and CEO of PolicyLink said something in the meeting. She says, as gracefully as she can, she says, if you're not doing equity work, what are you doing with collective impact? And that was a powerful moment in that session because what it said was that top-down, elite, white orientation, where whiteness is centered over everything else, meant that we weren't dealing with equity. We were dealing with what civic elites wanted to do at a particular time. And I'm saying that, and I could just as easily say it about black folks or anyone else who's in charge. Your consciousness is important about how you show up, because just because you're of color doesn't mean you're going to advance equity. But given the orientation of our society, whiteness is what's centered. And so it's dangerous when that's what's centered because it doesn't often allow for other things to be centered. That's why I said I center people and results. But you also then have to be willing to show up a particular way. I don't show up trying to be your friend. I'm not showing up worried about whether you're going to be uncomfortable or not. If we're doing the right work, we are going to be uncomfortable. We're going to be scared. It's going to be tough. And quite frankly, institutions will be upset. Folks, equity requires that you acknowledge the structural problems that still persist today. And too often in these equity initiatives, what gets delayed is their acknowledgement of that. So you're talking about a population level result and you think you're going to solve it by just doing charity work. I'll do this little reading program. Won't deal with the school or whatever. You know, that's fantasy. So equity isn't working in a lot of places because it was never in the heart of the leaders who were starting on this journey. And that is the biggest problem. That's why I said I'm so frustrated in our sector when we think about where is the shining light. Because if you think about it, it's taken us 20 years to get equity to be ubiquitous in civil society. Think about that for a moment. So I'm often surprised when people have the audacity to talk about how fast will we get results, when they actually haven't even shown the stomach to actually want to do the darn work. They haven't even earned that right to ask that question. And we fall into that trap all the time. Oh, I'll do it in 2 years. I'll do it in 3 years. If you really are, you are going to break a whole lot of stuff in community because it needs to be broken. And so this is what I'm struggling with equity right now, because so many places are not actually centering people in place. They're centering whiteness. And when whiteness gets centered, it sounds like this. Well, you know, if we do that, that person won't be comfortable. Our funder might not like that. I don't know if we can do that. That's not on the civic agenda right now. I don't know if we can say race. I don't know if we can name a thing a thing. That's centering whiteness. And I think about it because now that I'm not white and I'm in a place of privilege, I could easily do the same thing. So please don't hear that as a one-way street. Equity should start with us in our own organizations, for those of us with agency making decisions. And I say this with deep love in my heart, because the reality is right now at PolicyLink, I can make any decision I want. I can choose to hire Native Americans, I can choose to hire returning citizens, or I could just choose to hire from the best schools in the country and act like that's equity. That's not equity, folks. And here's the bigger reality. I don't have to get it to lead on equity. Women shouldn't have to wait for me to get, if I don't get it, about paying them fairly. My LGBTQ brothers and sisters shouldn't have to wait for me to get it to feel safe at work and be able to walk over that threshold and bring their full selves. The reality now about equity is this: if you don't get it, your job is to get out of the way. That is actually your job. Because you can't hold results and you don't get it. Because we're waiting until you get it before we can get to work. And that's what's not being said in community. The thing that's holding us up is whatever is centered. If it's black leadership, if it's white leadership, if it's Latino leadership, being centered and not being focused on equity. So what I'm asking you to consider is, if you don't want to do the work, you got to stop talking about the results, because you're giving your political opposition the ammunition to say, see, they spent all that money and it didn't work. And the reality is, yeah, we spent a lot of money, but we spent a lot of money to do charity work. We never spent money to actually get out of the problems that we've created. And the sad thing about all of this, that I'm so frustrated that my white brothers and sisters don't get, is that at this very moment where equity is the work, I'm not actually worried about people of color, even though there's great pain in our communities, because we know how to survive. The reality right now is this world is too toxic for white folks, and you see that in the diseases of despair data. White America now is struggling the same way everybody else is. You can't live in this society now and turn your head. Because in a place like I live in San Francisco, there's no middle class. It's a beautiful example of pushing everybody out. And you have to make a choice. Can you afford that private school and your pretty condo or home? No, you can't, because you neglected the public education infrastructure. So the reality is this: our desire to not deal with equity now has a world where there's too much pain for everybody. And the sad thing is, my white brothers and sisters think actually that black folks and Latinos had something to do with that. This is the world that you created. Sit with that for a moment. The last thing I'll say is, I often say that when I'm in places where I know where people will immediately go to personal responsibility in those things. And I say to them, you know, we actually heard you when you said personal responsibility. We've been doing it. That's why black women are the most educated group in America right now. But you, on the other hand, didn't do it. You sat in these small towns, you got rid of your daddy's union, you got rid of quality education, and now you're sitting in a place that has no opportunity. And you're mad at the world without ever wanting to own. But this is what you said you wanted. Folks, we've got to call it now, because we've got exactly what we've wanted. And now many of us want to cry about it because it hurts. I just say deal with it. And so if we're going to deal with equity right now, you got to get clear about calling results in this collective impact work or place-based work, whatever you want to do. Because if you don't deal with the structural stuff right now, there is nothing that you're going to do on the programmatic side of the house that is going to stem the tide of the pain that we are seeing in this nation. And so the sad thing is, all the easy stuff has been done. I think it's a great thing, because this is a time for great leadership. So if you ever wanted it, you get it now. But you got to be willing to get focused on, what does it mean to do equity work? And what does it mean to do work that is embodied in the word collective impact, which to me is results at scale.